support your paddleboarding? Or do you think that paddleboarding is just going to get you strong? So what muscle groups would you need to get stronger to support your paddleboarding? Well, if you look at the EMG studies and my own study on delayed onset muscle soreness, the groups that sort of really come to the fore are, yes, the abdominals, the low back muscles, the pectoral anterior chest, and definitely the posterior chain, the mid and upper traps. Those four groups kind of seem to score high in the research that I've read and done. Now, I guess if you want to really dig down deep, it kind of depends on what type of paddleboarding you're doing. Are you a long distance racer? Are you touring? Are you a paddle surfer? So you might have different needs, different strength targets, but in general, those torso areas seem to be the areas that we need to attack, and particularly this posterior chain, which is probably not too surprising, because if you've got, and I'm not going to go into technique, but if you've got relatively good paddling technique, you will see it's almost like a hinge action from here, and an action out in front, with the arms staying fairly straight, but the torso really digging in and extending, working through its posterior chain. Also, actually surprisingly, using your legs a fair bit as well. Now, of course, you know, one way to approach this would be perhaps to just replicate the sport. You know, you make yourself a land paddle, you give yourself some elastic resistance, and you know, away you go, whatever technique you've got. Look, that probably would help. You know, you put a little bit more volume in, but it never quite works in strength training just to go and try and copy and replicate the sport. You tend to need to be a little bit more accurate with the muscle groups, because then you can sort of overload them that little bit. With the workout I'm going to show you here, we're not really going to go for high weight, low repetition type stuff. It's going to be a home workout, but we are going to push you to sometimes almost towards failure. So it's kind of like a strength endurance type approach. I want to keep the workout real simple with minimal equipment, but we do need some form of resistance. So we're going to go for some of these. They're all over the internet, these exercise loops, exercise bands, and you're going to need an old towel, and that's it. So the first one's pretty fundamental. I think paddleboarding is a good way of getting a strong back, but you also need a strong back to do paddleboarding, if you get what I mean. Because there's quite a lot of this hip hinge going on, and then exploding back through your extensors, this sort of stuff here, and your low back is going to take the hit. So you want to really get doing some good old-fashioned sort of hip hinge deadlift type stuff. Get your band and pop one foot inside the band there, pop the other foot inside the band there. Now we're nice and safe. We've got a good strong, we can move around, and we can just go into some modified deadlifts. I kind of do a little complex, so in a way it's like a straight leg deadlift first, and just snapping through my hip snap, followed by a bent leg deadlift. And I complex that, I just work at those as pairs. So from the side you can see I'm trying to just sort of hip hinge a little bit, it's not too low, and then down into a straight forward. Shoulders back, get that posterior chain going, hip hinge again, through the glutes, through the extensors, get your hip snap going, and then follow in here. Fairly high volume, you probably wouldn't do that to failure, but fairly high volume. You're looking at sort of 25 in a set, and maybe 2 sets. Okay, this next one is definitely nastier than it looks. It's hard, and it works great. We said we've got to target this upper posterior chain as well, the shoulder girdle, posterior shoulder girdle. So step into your band, and it's real simple. You just pop it over your wrists. Okay, nice sort of wide position because you're going to squat into it as well. You're just going to do a forward raise of the band, fingers open, straight arms and back. So it's a squat with forward raise. But that is hard. It's real posterior chain. Little tip for you, look. These bands, they're great, but they're rubber. They cut into you if you're not careful. So kind of just get your old towel. You can wrap the band, wrap it around roughly, and it'll protect your wrist. So you can be out in here now, and as you're doing your raise, that'll just protect your wrist a little bit. From the side, Again, I'm just trying to get those shoulders back, hold a reasonably good angle, and then squat into my glutes with that raise. It's long lever, so it's quite hard. Real dorsal chain. I'm going to say little groups of 8. If you've got the right band, and this is rated 20 to 40 pounds, 8's enough. You really are shaking. So I'd go for 3 sets of 8 with a nice rest. I want to get some sort of lower dorsal, lower trap, lower lat dorsal stuff going now. So these bands are really useful just for locking onto things. I'm going to put it on this cable collar machine here, but you know, strong door handles, doorways. Just loop it on, it won't go anywhere. We're going to kind of look for a pulling pattern, but I want to get into extension, which is sometimes tough to do unless you've got a towel, because you just roll that towel up, put it through your band, and that's going to be where your grip is. So now I can get into this position and get those arms behind me. The further I am down the towel, the more behind they'll go. Weakness, if you're not careful, is people will sit back on it, so I kind of don't want them to do. So the fix for that is, rather than do it in this squat position, 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, you know, not quite in line but nearly, and then you're going to have to really, it's a little bit more isolationist, and I can get those behind me and work on a dorsal lower pull. And I just swap legs and work on that. Further away I go, the more resistance, further in, the less resistance. That's how these bands work. Kind of this one again is a little bit more high volume, so maybe 2 sets of 25. Of course, sometimes in paddleboarding you need to be a little bit more explosive. You need a little bit of, let's call it plyometric strength, that sort of real fast elastic strength. Particularly if you're paddle surfing, you want to get on that wave, or you're putting in a sudden acceleration when you're racing. So a little bit of speed work, speed strength if you want. You get your band still attached. How you do this is just pop your hand into the loop and then hold the band like so. It's a really comfortable grip. It won't then, you know, rub into your hand. The rubber won't rub, because we're going to do some speed pulls. Hold yourself in pretty decent posture. That's the movement pattern. Use your other arm to balance that out so we get a little bit of trunk rotation, and then you build it a little bit like this. So I just start, get the pattern going, I build, get aggressive, build, real fast, and stop. That would be 1 set. Do the other arm. With this sort of stuff, make sure you have a nice little rest period in between and really commit to it. Go fast, speed, strength. Now, as I said, we don't have to replicate the paddling stroke and try and overload just that, but there are elements of it that it would be nice to get into, and kind of one of them would be to get into that, what I call internal rotation of the hip here. When you paddle, there's often getting into that side glute and then getting into the opposite side glute in this sort of extended position, and then into flexion, snapping back to extension. You can do that really like so, just pulling down into this position here, but it really hurts your hands, and your hands are all over the place unless you've got a towel, because you can roll it up this way this time, slide it in your band, top hand, bottom hand. Again, we're not trying to totally replicate the grip, but now I can work with a straighter arms, and dropping into that hip just there, really getting into that good internal rotation of the hip. So a nice one to work down one side and then swap hands to work down the other side. Definitely a high volume one, this. Of course, the further you go away, the tougher it's going to be on your arms. This one though is really about that strength, endurance into this glute. So everybody always says paddle boarding is really good for the core. And the research sort of suggests maybe it is. My own research on delayed onset muscle soreness, certainly the abdominals are in the top 4 group for that with paddleboarders. So it's not going to do any harm to work on the core or really just the muscles up front, I tend to call it. And Pallof Press is a fairly popular exercise for sort of core type stuff. It's sort of anti-rotation. The band wants to flip me that way, and I'm stopping it with my abdominal muscles. And you can make it kind of smell a little bit of paddleboarding. I don't like this grip. It doesn't really feel natural for me for boarding. I like this grip again with the towel, and particularly my left hand on top because I'm kind of working towards the right hand side. So there I am in that position, holding that sort of high kneeling Pallof Press position, and I'm going to go into an overhead chop, back to midline, rotate. Overhead chop, back to midline and back. And all the time the band is trying to get me there, but I am fighting back against it, trying to hold that good strong pelvic position. Overhead chop, slight bend in your arms and rotate. Kind of like a little complex. It's relatively high volume. If you get the right band, if you're doing around about 15 to 20 each side, you'll be doing well, 2 sets. Now, if you want that Pallof Press type thing to work even harder for you, then do it as a floor up. Same routine, I would kind of make yourself that towel, get that grip. And this is quite tough, so you're going to be in there holding it right in front of your chest. It's not going to move from there, and I'm going to floor up, try and hold. It's a balance type movement as well, and back down again. So I'm flooring up, and I'm holding that high knee press, and back down again. You're really going to feel that as a sort of balance come core type activity. I would then do it on the opposite side as well, because you're going to be rotated in that direction, and then flip round and do it the other way so that the vector comes from the opposite side. Little groups of 5 on that one, just 5, maintain control. So down the gym you'll have seen the abdominal yoke press machine, multi-thousand pounds. You don't need one. Just get your towel, pop it around there, make your own yoke, get it over your shoulders, pull it down so you're locked in, and then you can do your own abdominal press, anterior abdominal press. I find it tends to work better. I've got some pads here, but you just use some cushions off the sofa. Just get your knees elevated a little bit and pull that down into your yoke position, and away you go. So if you're not used to this exercise, it will mug you a little bit in that it won't feel too hard for a start, but you do high volume of that and you're going to know about it. And it is a high volume exercise, so commit to doing around about 30 reps, bit of a rest, and then another set. So there you go, there's some simple ideas using simple equipment. To be honest with you, that's just a standalone sort of torso biased workout anyway, and who doesn't want a stronger torso? But you commit to it and it will help you with your strength endurance to support your supping.